Hello beautiful people, it's Sindafam. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be checking this video from Sowell, and it's titled Debunking Myth, Slavery Did Not Make Any Country Rich. Okay. Interesting, we're going to be checking this video together to hear what they've got to say. Let's check it out.
Those who think of slavery in economic terms often assume that it is a means by which a society, or at least its non-slave population, becomes richer. Some have even claimed that the Industrial Revolution in Western civilization was based on the profits extracted from the exploitation of slaves. Rather than rehash a large and controversial literature on this issue, we may instead look at the economic condition of countries or regions that used vast numbers of slaves in the past. Both in Brazil and in the United States, the countries with the two largest slave populations in the Western Hemisphere, the end of slavery found the regions in which slaves had been concentrated poorer than other regions of these same countries.
Wow.
For the United States, a case could be made that this was due to the Civil War, which did so much damage to the South. But no such explanation would apply to Brazil, which fought no civil war over this issue. Moreover, even in the United States, the South lagged behind the North in many ways, even before the Civil War.
So now, the question here is, when people talk about slavery, they always share a particular story that benefits one side or favors one side. They don't talk about slavery in the sense that it lets you know the participant or the people involved in it or who were involved in it. Why is that? Why is that? Why are they sharing or telling one side of the story, one part of the story? That's why I always learn or watch or listen to Sowell, because obviously you will find the truth and you'll find something interesting that you were not told or you were not taught. That's why many schools today are banning history and are banning history books. Why are they doing so?
Although slavery in Europe died out before it was abolished in the Western Hemisphere, as late as 1776, slavery had not yet died out all across the continent when Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations that it still existed in some eastern regions. But even then, Eastern Europe was much poorer than Western Europe.
Wow.
The slavery of North Africa and the Middle East, over the centuries, took more slaves from sub-Saharan Africa than the Western Hemisphere did, in addition to large imports of slaves from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe to the Muslim countries of North Africa and the Middle East.
We're going to repeat that part again because something interesting about it.
But even then, Eastern Europe was much poorer than Western Europe.
Okay.
The slavery of North Africa and the Middle East, over the centuries, took more slaves from sub-Saharan Africa than the Western Hemisphere did, in addition.
Do we need to repeat this part again? Let me repeat it again so people hear it clearly for themselves. Because obviously people are omitting this part and are omitting the involvement of this group of people.
Poorer than Western Europe. The slavery of North Africa and the Middle East, over the centuries, took more slaves from sub-Saharan Africa than the Western Hemisphere did, in addition to large imports of slaves from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe to the Muslim countries of North Africa and the Middle East. But these remained largely poor countries until the discovery and extraction of their vast oil deposits. In many parts of the non-Western world, slaves were sources of domestic amenities and means of displaying wealth with an impressive retinue, rather than sources of wealth.
Absolutely true. Lots of people use slaves as servants, maid, and all of those things to help them do chores, do their work, and all of that, where the rich people don't want to get their hands dirty and all of that, which is interesting. And we still have that happening today. Did it ever change or did it ever stop? That's the question. And the fact that lots of people don't want to learn the entirety of history and make sure it doesn't repeat itself, it's just in the way that now people learn it and repeat the exact same thing, do it over and over again. But yet, they still want to blame it on somebody and tell you, oh, the other person is the bad guy. Meanwhile, they are the ones like currently doing it now. They're not different than your ancestors, or they're not different from what has happened in the past. But they're still telling you to dwell in the past and tell you who to choose or who to pick as the enemy. Why is that?
Often, they were a drain on the wealth already possessed. According to a scholarly study of slavery in China, the slaves there did not generate any surplus. They consumed it.
Wow.
Another study concluded, the Middle East and the Arab world rarely used slaves for productive activities. Even though some slave owners, those whose slaves produced commercial crops or other saleable products, received wealth from the fruits of the unpaid labor of these slaves. That is very different from saying that the society as a whole, or even its non-slave population as a whole, ended up wealthier than it would have been in the absence of slavery. Not only in societies where slaves were more often consumers than producers of wealth, but even in societies where commercial slavery was predominant. This did not automatically translate into enduring wealth. Unlike a frugal capitalist class, such as created the Industrial Revolution, even commercial slave owners in the American antebellum South tended to spend lavishly, often ending up in debt or even losing their plantations to foreclosures by creditors.
So when people even say, oh, slavery made many nations rich, say they came, they took things, and it made some of the countries rich, and they blame it always on the Western countries and say, oh, look at the Western countries who are rich today. It was as a result of slavery or whatever. Or they tell you something, or some group of people will feed into some particular group of people's ear and tell them, oh, it is your money, your ancestors' money, your ancestors that were sold as slaves. This is what they did. Like, why is my point here is, why don't people always share and tell the truth? And why people always want to create and tell you who your real enemy is, or who to pick as your enemy? Part of what is happening in the West today is as a result of people feeding into some group of people's ear to tell them, oh, this person is using your money, or this person is using this to build their country or to build their nation. Or tell them, oh, your ancestors worked for this, so go take it back. That is what they do. Why is that? Why are they claiming and painting who you have to pick as your enemy? Why is that?
However, even if British slave owners had saved and invested all of their profits from slavery, it would have amounted to less than 2% of British domestic investment. In the United States, it is doubtful whether the profits of slavery would have covered the enormous costs of the Civil War, a war that was fought over the immediate issue of secession. But the reason for the secession was to safeguard slavery from the growing anti-slavery sentiment outside the South, symbolized by the election of Abraham Lincoln. Brazil, which had several times as many slaves as the United States, and perhaps consumed more slaves than any other nation in history, was nevertheless still a relatively undeveloped country when slavery ended there in 1888. And its subsequent economic development was largely the work of immigrants from Europe and Japan. In short, even though some individual slave owners grew rich and some family fortunes were founded on the exploitation of slaves, that is very different from saying that the whole society, or even its non-slave population as a whole, was more economically advanced than it would have been in the absence of slavery. What this means is that whether employed as domestic servants or producing crops or other goods, millions suffered exploitation and dehumanization for no higher purpose than the transient aggrandizement of slave owners.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas Sowell, for sharing the truth and for taking us through this, because this history is failed to be taught in schools, or is not taught in schools. They feed one side, tell you one side of it, and tell you who to pick or who to choose as your enemy. They also don't tell you the entire thing or event or what happened in history and others' involvement in history, but they only tell you the side to hate. But this was interesting find. Regardless, let me know what you think. I'm sure tons of people have interesting things to share. I would really love you to share that. You can share the useful information you think might be really helpful. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and all of that stuff. And until next time, see you in the next video.